I want to start by showing you this picture. It's a picture that you might be familiar with. It's a picture of Stonehenge in England. And according to the Stonehenge website, this structure was thought to have been built in phases from 2900 BC to 2200 BC. But who built it, why they built it, what the people did who built it, that's still a very unsolved mystery. One thing we do know about Stonehenge is that it is an example of archaeoastronomy. In simpler terms, what this is an example of is that the architecture seems to have been intentionally built to line up with the rising and with the setting of the sun at certain times of the year, particularly during the summer solstice. There's many theories that abound about why it was built in this way. Some have asked, was this some sort of ancient temple? Was it a place to worship the sun? Was it built in a circle to act as a boundary between those who were members of some ancient cult and those who were on the outside of the cult? Nobody really knows. But I'll tell you one thing. Nobody doubts that Stonehenge was built. People have major questions about how the rocks were transported there so many years ago. We've got questions about why it was built, but nobody calls into question that some intelligent beings built this incredible ancient structure 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. There's nobody out there who thinks that this just evolved over time. There's nobody arguing that it probably just dropped there by some ancient meteorite. Everybody thinks that there was a person or a group of people who intentionally caused this effect that has become one of the most spectacular tourist sites in England today. Now, let me show you something else. This is planet Earth as viewed from space. Okay? This is where we live. This planet is the only one in our galaxy with the perfect gravitational force field so that man neither floats off into space nor is crushed to the Earth. This planet has the perfect temperatures for our survival. It puts us on a planet, if you were to put us on a planet closer to the sun, we'd all be burnt to a crisp. If you were to put us on a planet farther away from the sun, we would all freeze to death. This planet has liquefied water, which human beings need to live. This planet has land to grow food and to raise animals, which we also need to live. This planet has the perfect level of oxygen makeup so that we can breathe and so that we can live. And with these types of indicators, certainly most people would believe that there must have been some intelligent designer behind such an intelligently designed planet, right? I mean, if we can look at Stonehenge, which is just a round pile of rocks, and we say that requires a designer, even if we don't know who the designer is, certainly we can see that planet Earth and our universe must have also had some design, right? So how did it get here? How did man get here? How is it that this planet meets these perfect conditions required for the survival of plant, animal, and human life? Well, this is what one professor, who was a professor of physics at City University of New York, once wrote. He says, "I propose that our universe had been created spontaneously from nothing as a result of established principles of physics. Our universe is simply one of those things which happen from time to time." Just happened. We just happened to have right amount of oxygen, just happen to have the right amount of gravity. We just happen to have the right amount of algae in the ocean so that, the algae can breathe out oxygen, so that just happens to be the right temperature. Just everything just happens to be just right. We just got lucky. That's what our scientists sometimes say about the origin of our planet. Here's another one. Alan Guth and Paul Steinhardt, they authored an article in Scientific American. It's called The Inflationary Universe. They say the inflationary model of the universe provides a possible mechanism by which the observed universe could have evolved from an infinitesimal region. It is tempting to go one step further and speculate. This speculation isn't science, by the way, but it's in a science journal, so we sometimes think it is. But we speculate that the universe evolved from literally nothing. So this huge universe just came from nothing. That's what some have suggested. Here's Victor Stenger. He's a professor of physics at the University of Hawaii at one point in time. He wrote an article called Was the Universe Created? He says the universe is probably the result of a random, we're just all here randomly, just a random quantum fluctuation, lots of big fancy words, in a spaceless, timeless void. What caused it? Not everything requires a cause. It could have just happened spontaneously as one of the many linear combinations of universes that has the quantum numbers of the void. Much is still in the speculative stage. You've got that right. And I must admit that there are yet no empirical or observational tests that can be used to test the idea of an accidental origin. So he admits there's no empirical or observational tests. It may just be, though, this just random chance, just luck. Here's another one. Atheist Quentin Smith once wrote this: the most reasonable belief is that we came from nothing, by nothing, and for nothing. That's reasonable to some people who don't want to believe there could be a God. I want to ask you some questions as we think about this more. This is Bill Bryson. We could go on with quotes like these, but he writes in A Short History of Nearly Everything, it seems impossible that you could get something from nothing. You're right, it does seem impossible, actually. But the fact once there was nothing and now there is a universe is evident proof that you can. Okay? Just something just came from nothing. And that's what I say to that. Huh? I just want to ask, is there a better reason for the existence of our complex universe than that? And this is the kind of stuff that professors and people with degrees are teaching in a lot of universities, and we're just buying into it because we think that they're smart. But is that really logical? Does that logic really work in the real world? Sorry, officer, I know it sounds impossible, but I guess those drugs and guns in my trunk just came out of nowhere. Is that going to work with the cop pulls you over? Or when you see the huge amounts of credits on your credit card statement, honey, I have no idea where those charges on the credit card statement came from. I guess they just showed up out of nowhere. We know that an effect has a cause, right? Someone put those guns and drugs in your trunk, whether it be you or someone else, but they didn't just pop up out of nowhere. Somebody charged that credit card. May not have been you. Maybe your credit card was stolen, but it didn't just get there out of nowhere. Somebody did it. This effect has a cause. Or this sounds like very similar logic to the first two examples, but this is from a professor, so it must be right. Our universe is simply one of those things which happen from time to time. Universe just happened. Now, the first two, we know good and well, that's not going to work with a police officer. It's not going to work in a court of law. Probably won't even work with your spouse as you try to explain your credit card. And it shouldn't work when evolutionists try to take God out of the equation as they explain the origins of our universe. It lacks common sense. to say that we have this effect without a cause. So let's think a little more logically about how all of this happened. I want to refer you to a book Lee Strobel wrote called The Case for a Creator. Lee Strobel, by the way, was once an atheist and converted to Christianity, and he interrogates and questions a lot of scientific minds. In his book, he's got a good book, The Case for Christ, which I also recommend. Case for Creator is pretty good as well. Case for Faith is the one that I don't recommend as much, actually, myself, in his series. But I think there's some good reading here. But as he's interviewing William Lane Craig, which if you ever get a chance to Google or YouTube William Lane Craig, just do it, because he's fantastic apologist. He's got great material. Evidence is material. But William Lane Craig writes, the idea that things can come into being uncaused, out of nothing, it's worse than magic. At least when a magician pulls a rabbit out of a hat, there's the magician and the hat. But in atheism, the universe just pops into being out of nothing with absolutely no explanation at all. I think once people understand the concept of absolute nothingness, it's simply obvious to them that if something has a beginning, that it could not have popped into being out of nothing, but must have a cause that brings it into existence. And that's just logical. Every effect has to have a cause. So there's three possibilities. Where did the universe come from? There's three basic possibilities that we want to consider. The first possibility is this: is the universe, is it eternal? Has it always existed? The universe, along with planet Earth, it's here. It demands some sort of explanation. R.C. Sproul writes, he says, traditional philosophy argued for the existence of God on the foundation of the law of causality. The cosmological argument, that's what we're talking about today, it went from the presence of a cosmos back to a creator of the cosmos. And it sought a rational answer to the question, why is there something rather than nothing? It sought a sufficient reason for the real world. And so there's three possibilities as to why there is something rather than nothing. The universe is eternal. Perhaps it has always existed and always will exist. Now, in view of recent research, most scientists don't hold the view that our universe is eternal. That's why, by the way, the Big Bang exists in the first place, even though most scientists don't agree with that now either. But it exists because most scientists believe the universe had to have had a beginning. And at one point in time, that was their explanation as to why there's a beginning. Dr. Robert Jastrow, he was an astrophysicist. Here's what he writes. He says, about 30 years ago, science solved the mystery of the birth and death of stars, and they acquired new evidence that the universe had a beginning. And concurrently, there was a great deal of discussion about the fact that the second law of thermodynamics applied to the cosmos indicates that the universe is running down like a clock. And if it is running down, there must have been a time when it was fully wound up. The argument, very simply, that he's making is that the universe has a beginning, and the universe seems to have at some point an end. Einstein in 1915, he was the first to realize with his general theory of relativity that the universe, it was either exploding or it was imploding. But the implications of one or the other implies the universe is not eternal. According to Dr. William Lane Craig, he said in the 1920s, the Russian mathematician Alexander Friedmann and the Belgian astronomer George Lemaitre, they were able to develop models based on Einstein's theory of relativity. They predicted the universe was expanding. Of course, this meant that if you went backward in time, the universe would go back to a single origin before which it didn't exist. And astronomer Fred Hoyle derisively called this the Big Bang. and this name stuck. So the idea was, if the universe is expanding, when you keep going backwards, it came back to a single point. That single point was once called the Big Bang. Most people, by the way, don't believe the Big Bang anymore. So when you argue against the Big Bang, you're generally arguing against a straw man, because most scientists don't believe in that. But they do believe there's a beginning and an end. There's other scientific facts that indicate the universe had a beginning. Hubble's discovery of distant starlight in the 1920s indicates that there must have been a beginning. The background temperature of the universe was discovered in 1965. The origin of light elements, all those things would indicate that, just very simply, the universe is not eternal. That's not really a scientifically plausible option. Okay? So there's a second option. Maybe the universe did create itself. Okay? Perhaps the universe created itself out of nothing. But the problem with this is that it violates the first law of thermodynamics. The first law of thermodynamics is that matter nor energy can be created or destroyed in nature. Okay? Matter can't create itself. The evolutionists would have us defy this scientific law as they explain the origins of the universe, though, from a naturalistic standpoint. They are arguing, as we've already quoted, that something came from nothing, which is a violation of science. That would also pose a problem as we consider the origin of life. Because the origin of life, if it came from nothing, that also would seem to defy the law of biogenesis, which is simply the idea that life comes from life. You don't get life from non-life. Spontaneous generation, it has never been observed. It has been debunked. Life comes from life. It doesn't come from non-life. But the evolutionists would have us defy that law as they try to explain life evolved naturally without God. More importantly, the idea that something came from nothing violates the law of cause and effect, which is what we're talking about here today. So what the cosmological argument is, that every effect has a cause. Something from nothing violates that law. Every effect must have an adequate cause. You don't get something from nothing. All right? So what is the next option? Well, maybe the universe was created then. Since the universe, it hasn't always existed, that's not consistent with science, then is it possible that it was created by a superior being? Now, if you're someone who enters into your studies ruling out the possibility of God and that there is a God, then what you have to do is look for naturalistic possibilities. You have to rule out from the very beginning of your study and pursuit of this question anything supernatural. Here's the problem with ruling out anything supernatural. What if there is a God? And that is the most plausible reason for why we have the earth and the universe that we have today. And that's really where the cosmological argument comes in. The cosmological argument is an explanation of the cosmos. Notice the word cosmos is in the term cosmological. Aristotle, he once taught the universe was eternal. John Philoponus of Alexandria, Egypt, he sought to refute those views in the 4th century. His philosophy was refined by a Muslim. His name was Al-Ghazali, who lived from 1058 to 1111 AD, and others picked up the elements of this cosmological argument over time. Bonaventure was an Italian philosopher. He talked about it in the 13th century. John Locke was a British philosopher who talked about it in the 17th century. And Immanuel Kant was a German philosopher who refined the cosmological argument in the 18th century. But various people have spoken about it through the years is the point. And the basic form of the cosmological argument is offered as a syllogism. Here's what it is. Here's the syllogism. First point is whatever begins to exist must have an adequate cause. Anything that begins to exist has to have an adequate cause. Second point is this: the universe began to exist. It's not eternal. It has a beginning, and therefore, if everything that begins to exist must have an adequate cause, and the universe has begun to exist, the universe has a cause. Something caused this. Some might argue the Big Bang is an adequate cause, but again, where did the matter and energy that went bang, where did that come from? You don't have that explained. Evolutionists will counter, well, where did God come from? Remember, the argument is whatever begins to exist. God is eternal. God is timeless. God is infinite. God cannot be defined in finite material terms like the universe and matter can. The universe is here, so it must have an adequate and antecedent cause. And this cause can't be explained in natural terms and claim to be scientific at the same time. So we've got to look for a cause that's beyond the natural realm. We've got to consider the omnipotent God. So any explanation of our universe that doesn't admit there's an intelligent designer behind the design or a creator behind the creation falls short of logic. This is just one argument, the cosmological argument. We're going to spend, when we meet hopefully next month, we're going to talk about the teleological argument. We're going to take a little bit more at that specific design and consider the fact that design demands a designer. We're going to look at the moral argument, which C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity really did a good job refining, if you like to read. We're going to look at the moral argument in our second study after next month. We're going to look at the information argument, which is one of the newest arguments, and it's based upon the study of DNA. Where did all the information that is so well organized, more intricately than a library, where did all of that information come from? We're going to look at that 3 months from now, and we're going to keep working through it. And then we're going to spend some time talking about Darwinian evolution and comparing some of the things that Darwin believed to what the Bible teaches and really what science teaches as we continue working through this. We're just studying God right now. That's it. And then we're going to get to the Bible. Then we're going to get to Jesus as we work through some of these lessons. Take a look at what R.L. Wysong once wrote. And I'd ask the question as we read this, are we ignoring logic in favor of philosophy? But he says, everyone concludes naturally and comfortably that highly ordered and designed items like machines or houses owe existence to a designer. Okay, I'm building a house right now. I didn't just go to a Home Depot and blow it up and it came together. Someone designed it and people are putting it together. Okay, the design demands a designer. We understand that about a house. We understand about your car. You didn't just go to a junkyard and blow up the junkyard and it all came together just right. Somebody put that thing together. Somebody designed it very intricately. Somebody much smarter than me who's good with mechanics and good with engineering. We understand that when it comes to highly ordered and designed items. They owe existence to a designer. It is unnatural for us to conclude otherwise. But evolution asks us to break stride from what is natural to believe and believe in that which is unnatural, unreasonable, and unbelievable. And the basis for this departure from what is natural and reasonable to believe is not fact. It's not observation, as some of the other quotes mentioned earlier. It's not experience. It is unreasonable extrapolations from abstract probabilities, mathematics, and philosophy. It's just speculation. So are we ignoring logic in favor of holding to our philosophies? I would have to agree with what William Lane Craig said in his work, Reasonable Faith. He says the most plausible answer to the question of why something exists rather than nothing is that God exists. And what he says there is consistent with just two simple verses. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, the first verse you read in your Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Why do we have the universe that we have today? It's because God exists, and God caused it to exist. That's the very beginning of Scripture. Hebrews 3 and verse 4 in the New Testament, it says, every house is built by someone, but he who built all things is God. Why do we have the universe that we have today? Because there is a God. Look, nobody will accept that Stonehenge just happened. Is that what we should believe about our complex, well-designed universe? Not according to these scriptures. It's hard for some people to admit the scriptures are right all along about the origins of the universe. Sometimes we want to so badly deny God any access, any authority over our lives that we will come up with any radical explanation possible to prove that he doesn't exist. But the most reasonable, as we think about it, philosophy as to why there is the universe in existence, is that there is a powerful, all-powerful, eternal God who caused it to happen. Why do we want to reject that sometimes? Why does the world want to reject that? I'd suggest to you that sometimes we want to reject there's a God because we realize if there is a God, we're going to have to start living and serving him. If we admit that we have a creator, then we've got to do what he calls the created to do. Nehemiah seems to have understood all that a creator implies. What does a creator imply? When you read Nehemiah chapter 9, verse 6, as Nehemiah tries to lead Israel out of their lukewarm ways, he says, you alone are Yahweh. You created the heavens, the highest heavens with all their host, the earth and all that is on it, the seas and all that is in them. You give life to all of them, and the heavenly host worships you. If there is a creator, he deserves our worship. Sometimes we'd rather do as we please rather than as the creator's will would have us to do.